My name is Bridget Llanes, and I'm originally from southeastern New Mexico, from Hobbs, New Mexico. Some of the work that I've been doing has been working on food equity and addressing food equity through creating neighborhood gardens. So I first started off doing this work when I was at UNM in a geology class with Bernadette Hardy, and we were working on a contour map of a jet fuel spill. And we were both like, there's a jet fuel spill. Don't you live on top of here? I think it was a question that we were both asking each other, and then asked the teacher, what is this jet fuel spill? And he said, oh, that's the Kirtland Air Force Base jet fuel spill. It's the largest jet fuel spill in New Mexico. And none of us, we hadn't heard of it. No one we talked to in the neighborhood, in the international district, had heard of it. And that began our work. The 24 million gallon jet fuel spill, it's going from the Air Force Base to about the edge of it is about where Van Buren Middle School is on southern in Louisiana. So it was something that definitely made me want to start communicating with others, to ask them what kind of information they knew, start talking to the Air Force Base to figure out why there had been such a large jet fuel spill, why it wasn't being cleaned up, and then start working with other community members to problem solve. We were working with community members to come up with some ideas and solutions, and also just to ask questions like, what do we want to know from the Air Force Base? How can we hold them accountable? That's really how it started. I'm currently working at Van Buren Middle School just as an interim agricultural caretaker of the Si Se Puede garden. I have just been doing some mulching and cover cropping, taking care of all the fruit trees there, just until kids are able to go into the garden again. I worked for an organization called the More Gardens Fund, and the people that I worked with had lots of connections in schools, and were realizing schools have tons of land that who gets to access, right? Who gets to access this fenced off land? And why are we not using it to actually help feed our students? And Van Buren is a really good example. They have a lot of land, and then use them as places of education, as places of student engagement, and then as a way to also feed the school community and also the community at large. A community member, Reina Luz Juarez, asked me at one point, can't plants do healing of our land? Don't they do that? What about sunflowers? I was like, what about sunflowers? And so that began the research that I was doing, and I became a McNair Scholar and a Udall Fellowship recipient based on the research of phytoremediation, or how plants can actually heal toxic substances from the earth. I've done some soil testing at schools. I soil tested at Van Buren, at Whittier, at Wilson, and at Polk. Done some soil testing in a few schools for heavy metals, volatile organic compounds, and ethylene dibromide in some of the locations. And those are components, those are things that would be found in fuel. So we just want to make sure it's safe to plant gardens. And we've also been making videos to show students hey, you can do this, and this is why, this is why we want to learn about what's in the soil, and this is how what's in the soil actually is also what we eat. To what degree is the city alive for me? And I feel it all the time. I feel it as soon as I walk out the door in the morning on my walk. Walking is something that grounds me. I think something that started happening for me as I was a young person is I got a chance to make a garden for Earth Day one year. And I remember at my school, I was one of just a few people who did that work. And being able to walk and see where I've made some kind of impact, that I have some kind of, as a young person, that I have some kind of relationship with where I live, besides just shopping or driving past places or whatever, knowing that when I'm walking, that I actually see a tree that I planted, or I see a garden or whatever, as a young person, who had a lot, like I felt a lot of depression actually. That garden and being able to come back to it and pass by it and recognize that like I had my hands in that just did so much good for me in my heart. It made me feel really connected to where I was from. And I wanted to share that with others. Like I remember as a young person, and I think I must have been 13, I was like, oh, this is something I understand. This is something I understand. I mean, I maybe don't feel very connected to my school or whatever, but I understand this. And I understand that it, you know, what it means to feel like I belong someplace. I think like in terms of how I feel, how important it is that the city is alive, the city becomes alive when we recognize that the earth beneath it is what we are responsible for caring for. If we were thinking about this, like maybe we would be mindful about the structures we put up or how we care for structures or how places are like so much of architecture really determines, do places feel friendly? Do they feel, you know, human? Do they feel like places of connection for people? And school gardens have this, you know, this land that, oh my gosh, like it's a great teaching tool because this is this is where you can learn, like you can actively be seeing, you know, what's happening, the relationships that happen between birds and bees and animals and humans. Like you can see all of these great annexes and then also see like what happens whenever the school community becomes really a caretaker for the land that it is on. Or maybe caretaker is not the right word, caregiver. That's definitely the work here, is figuring out how to get these spaces, these school spaces activated, and how to have teachers be really supported in this work, because it's a lot of work, and that's why you actually need lots of, you know, in addition to teachers, you need community to be able to support growing food and working with young people. And, you know, that's, you know, the whole, it takes a village. It really, you know, it takes a village to also be able to be in celebration and sustain the development and the nurturing of the land that we're on. There are 13 sites in the Bernalillo County Ag Plan, and Van Buren is one of them. We're trying to figure out how to have school gardens be more of a part of the ag plan also. But the purpose of the ag plan is to kind of envision out these garden spaces that are community garden spaces, places of pollination, places that can actually help to feed neighborhoods. And it's great to be able to have that vision for 13 sites, thinking like what could the international district look like if it was full of these edible food gardens that were like learning and teaching gardens as well. To connect that to climate change, and then also how we can, you know, how to talk to young people about that, and then what is maybe how do we take a step? How do we step, one step, two steps in the right direction? I was looking at how December 1st was marked the peak of our drought in the last 20 years. I'm just really cognizant of that. I'm like, we didn't have a monsoon season. We were already in a mega drought. When you grow things, you need water. How is an aquifer created? How is an aquifer recharged? Like, how do we nourish the water that is beneath us and then the watershed that we live in? That's a pretty important part of any school garden curriculum. And then also challenging ourselves, like, how do we make drought tolerant gardens that are also going to be adaptable to temperatures rising? Humans are very adaptable. We are very resilient. So how do we be strategic? Like, our temperatures are rising. So what are the kinds of food crops that can actually grow as our temperatures are rising? What is the difference between weather and climate? Talk it out with youth. What can we do? because there's actually a lot that we can. I have these environmental justice presentations that I give. I give it to Together for Brothers or for the Rocky Mountain Youth Corps or whatever. And the purpose of the presentation is really just to hear what young people are thinking about what's happening. I mean, a lot. They've been, unfortunately, we have had decades of not caring for the earth the way that it needs to be. So they're inheriting that, but they're not alone. That's something that's super important. They're not alone. Like, I'm in my 40s, and I mean, it's my objective to plant as many freaking shade trees as I possibly can all over the place with community members, so that we can have food and so that we can have shade. So I want to hear the ideas that they are having, or any kind of thoughts, and then I also want to be able to provide them with some information, like what does recharge an aquifer, and how can we start working towards that? How can we start really, what does that mean that water is sacred? I think a lot of what happens in school gardens, or can happen, is that there's not a lot of time, right? Teachers don't have tons of time. So they're buying bags of soil, buying bags of compost. And just to ask these kind of questions, where is the soil and the compost coming from? Why is it that we can't plant directly in the ground? Why are we planting in raised beds? It's a frequent model for school gardens to be planting in raised beds. Like, what is that about? Is it possible for us to nurture the land that we are on, the land of the school? Is it possible for us to grow and build soil together? Learning about the soil food web is that's great ecology, great science skills, to really be thinking about okay, we are so interconnected, all of these itty bitty bacteria, we have so much relationship with them on down the line. These, bacteria that produce this really great soil, that give us really rich compost, that gives us these beautiful fruits and vegetables. We are constantly in connection with the little bichos and grubs and crazy things that you can find in compost when you're working to build soil. So I think having a compost in a school garden is really essential, because it teaches us we can actually build soil, because when we're doing agriculture, we are reducing the organic matter in arable soil. It's something that I feel is it's something we have to take seriously, because of the massive reduction of organic soil that's caused by agriculture. It's our job to continuously nurture the soil and build the soil. And some of that soil health is finding out, are there metals in the soil that we can remediate? Does the soil just need more organic matter? How can we really nourish our own soil? How can we support community composting? Sunflowers for Change has been having Pláticas de los Hongos, just to talk about mushrooms and the power of mushrooms, and how a mycorrhizal net of mushrooms are underneath us, even in the desert, and how can we nourish them, because that's definitely a part of soil health. So it's been cool, because we've been able to have conversations with people who grow mushrooms and cultivate them for putting in school gardens, for putting in front yard gardens, talking about putting mushrooms, little mushroom spawn all over the place in little curbside areas, and little back alleyways that we don't even, maybe we don't even hang out in enough and respect enough, and start to nurture the soil more by giving back, by creating some really healthy environments with mushrooms. What is environment? Environmental justice presentations that I give to youth, that's the first question we start with, is what is environment? This word, right, it's a very constructed word, separates us, or can separate us from what is us. We are, our environment is definitely that part of and not above, we are, our bodies are the earth. When I'm hanging out with a kid and they're eating broccoli that they grew themselves, and they don't normally even like vegetables, it's such a cool thing to have them want to take good care of that plant all of a sudden because they recognize that they're being nurtured by it. It's like, yeah, and that plant is a part of you. And it's so awesome because then you can be like strong that way. And that kind of, you know, the feeling of the earth like really having our back, you know, and that kind of gratitude that comes from acknowledging that, like, wow, like we are so blessed. The earth provides us with so much, and now we can care for it too. That relationship is essential to kind of this decolonizing, deconstructing the way that that we've been moving with the earth.